Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today, in a continuation of my series where we look at the starting armies, factions, lords and effects for each faction in Total War Warhammer 3, Immortal Empires, we shall be taking a look at the Tomb Kings, the lords, their abilities, the starting armies and positions, and I shall then be ranking them from the kind of easiest to hardest for both new players and returning players alike. My apologies for being away so long. I've had a few health problems and other issues, but hopefully I'll be able to now get back into YouTube and produce some more decent content for you all. Thank you all for subscribing. It really means the world to me. Feel free to leave a like and or subscribe on this video. I'll reply to any comments that are left as well. And without further ado, let's get into the video. The Tomb Kings are an interesting faction, obviously being introduced with the DLC in Warhammer 2, and they haven't really seen many changes going into Warhammer 3. But that doesn't mean they're underpowered. They're in quite an interesting spot at the moment where they are playable, if a little bit weak. So starting off here, we have Settra the Imperishable from the faction Khemri, the kind of face of the Tomb Kings. A pretty cool looking guy in his kind of chariot. Now he starts here, just kind of south of the Badlands, in this kind of weird deserty spot. It's quite a decent starting position. He's got a couple of other Tomb King factions around him. Unfortunately, they cannot confederate, which is quite annoying, obviously, because you have Arkhan over here, you have Khalida. I mean, she's quite far away, to be fair, but you can do some stuff with her. But the good thing about his position is that he has room to go for orcs, he has room for beastmen, for Petronia, even other Tomb Kings. There's elves to his south as well as demon factions. You've really got a lot of choice with Settra. Now, that doesn't mean he's easy. He actually has quite a tough start position in kind of expanding. However, if you play on lower difficulties, you'll find it easy to consolidate this province here. And then you have things like the Black Pyramid and other stuff here. It's quite a nice starting province, starting area for you to even expand into. Even looking at his starting army, it is very anemic, as, to be honest, most of the Tomb King ones were. When they ported them over to Warhammer 3 for some very strange reason, like they did with most factions, they took away a lot of the Tier 4 and Tier 5 units, and the Tomb Kings, I think, got hit not the hardest, but close to the hardest with this. Settra here starts with some very, very basic units. He starts with Skeleton Archers, Skeleton Archer Chariots, Skeleton Warriors, and Tomb Guard with Halberds. Now, Skeleton Archers, standard missile infantry for the Tomb Kings, they are incredibly weak in melee. Like, they will melt the moment anything hits them. They're actually quite good in range. They received a few buffs in Warhammer 3, especially in the most recent patch and the patch before that. They have decent range, decent ammo, and there's a lot of them, obviously 120 on ultra unit size. So they're not bad, but of course with the Tomb Kings, all their units are recruited for free, and so you'll be able to just recruit these, but these are the first unit where you have a unit cap. I shall explain this in a Tomb King video that I will be releasing soon where I kind of analyse the DLC in detail. But you get a cap on these, and the cap will mean that having some to start with, although essentially it turns recruitment away and not costing you anything, it's not awful. I mean, they are one of the better units you start with, to be honest, which doesn't say a lot for the other one. Skeleton Archer Chariots, another quite interesting unit, being anti-infantry missile chariots. These, I don't rate them at all. I think they are a little bit too slow. I think that they're crap in melee, and I don't think they're overly good in range. I don't think they really contribute a lot, and because they are a tier 2 unit, they do have a unit cap, and they do take up a place in your army, and I just don't think they're worthwhile. Could you do stuff with them if you're particularly good with chariots? I can imagine some people doing some pretty nice stuff with them. I myself can't really make them work, so I don't tend to use them. I tend to almost just always kind of use them as kind of bait for missiles or other things when I'm fighting bigger armies than myself in the first couple of turns of Settra's campaign. Then you have Skeleton Warriors. Now, the Tomb Kings have two meat-style units. They have the Sword Infantry and they have the Spear Infantry. The Spear Infantry are tankier, they have more health, and they last longer. So under no circumstances ever would I recruit Skeleton Warriors. That not only do they not do any damage with a pathetic melee attack of 18, but they are also less armoured and less health than their flesh counterpart, and these are the only two units in the game that can be spam recruited. And so these are crap. These are worse than the Spearmen. I actually tend to disband them and replace them with the Spearmen the moment that my army is about to fill up, which is within 3 or 4 turns as Tomb Kings. Finally, we have the Tier 2 unit, Tomb Guard Halberds. These are actually pretty good. The Tomb Guard are like the elite, I call them elite, semi-elite infantry of the Tomb Kings. They're not elite, but they're also not awful. These are the Halberd variant. These are probably my favourite variant of them. They're anti-large, they're quite armoured, they have a charge defense against large foes. They will take down good, strong cavalry units and some weaker monsters. They are still undead, they do have quite a low health pool, and they're not that strong in melee. they will lose to almost every other melee unit, and against powerful large units, don't expect them to come out on top. But they're quite nice to start with. It takes a little bit, I say a little bit, it takes maybe 2 or 3 turns to get them recruitable, so it's not amazing, but they're fine. So a pretty anemic starting army, I think we can all agree, and certainly not a patch on what they used to have. I can't even remember what Settra had, but I remember his being quite strong. We'll get onto some of the other ones that I do remember a bit later. Then we can have a look at the faction and lord effects that Settra brings to his army. So faction-wise, he gives plus 50% allegiance points gained for alliances of Tomb Kings. Now, allegiance points are those things that you spend on, essentially on recruiting troops that your allies have unlocked. If this was with other factions, not that that would make sense, I actually think it would be better, because it means you can recruit more interesting kind of range of troops. You could try and ally with certain factions to fill your armies up a little bit more. All this does is allow you to recruit troops from other Tomb King factions. Now, whilst it sounds quite good, do remember, A, Tomb King faction troops are free, and B, there is a unit cap, and recruiting troops from other alliances counts towards the unit cap. It may give you like +1, but that's all it does, and so I don't really rate this. I think it can be a little bit abused to get much higher unit caps, but I don't like playing like that, and I don't think it's an overly exciting faction effect. His other two actually are quite good though. -1 construction time for all buildings. It's every single building, whether it's main settlement chain, minor settlement chain, military, economic, growth buildings, all of them. -1 turn for construction. Now, Tomb King buildings take a fucking age to build. They are a nightmare. If you want to build lots and lots of them to get your unit caps up, it's going to take ages. And so this does speed that up quite a bit, and actually this is why I will recommend at the end, recommend Settra as your starting faction, despite him not being my favourite, because that faction effect just allows you to expand so much faster. Same with the next one, +20 growth. 20 growth isn't massive, but in all provinces, it will quickly add up into more and more points that you can then spend on upgrading your settlement chains, getting those unit caps up. Because the big thing with Tomb Kings is you want to have as many military buildings as possible to fill your armies up with troops. Lord-wise, he also has some pretty good stuff. 10% casualty replenishment rate in his own army, not bad, not incredible either. Tomb King replenishment is on a bit of an anemic side though, so this is a nice little boost, I suppose. Leadership aura size plus 100%. If you've watched any video on my channel before, no matter what it's on, you'll know that I despise leadership aura as a mechanic. And this just means it's bigger. It means when he crumbles and dies, his army will crumble and die even faster, and I just don't understand why that's a good thing. If you like leadership aura, he has a lot more of it, so I suppose you can go home with that, but I don't rate it at all. And he also gives himself +1 local recruitment capacity. Whilst with most other factions I actually think that would be brilliant, I don't actually rate it overly high on Tomb King scale, because the thing with Tomb Kings is a lot of their units take more than 1 turn to recruit, and a lot of their units are unit capped, as I said. So in the early game, you'll be spamming a lot of archers, you'll be spamming a lot of spearmen, as well. This means that +1 recruitment capacity isn't going to be as important. It's useful, don't get me wrong, it's a nice effect to have. I think he would benefit from something else. I think he would benefit more from -1 recruitment duration for units in his local province, something like that. But that's unfortunately not the way it works. Settra himself he's a pretty decent warrior. He's anti-large. He gets, as you can see in the clip there, his Chariot of the Gods, which is a pretty good chariot unit, kind of races through stuff. He's pretty powerful. He's got some cool abilities. He's got some reasonably good artifacts. However, he is slightly lacking in the melee. He won't definitely not beat Duelist and other kind of strong melee lords. He's not a caster either. He's kind of a weird kind of anti-large lord. A bit like Marathi, but obviously Marathi can cast spells while Settra can't. He's not bad. He's also not that good though. Next up, as he says, join with us, it's Grand Hierophant Khatep from the Exiles of Nehek faction. Strangely strange faction. If we show you their starting area, they start way over here, as they did beforehand in Warhammer 2 and earlier on in Warhammer 3 as well, near Taurox, near the Sisters of Twilight, near the Dark Hills, and now near Grombrindle. It's an interesting start position. It is not an easy one. You will be swarmed by more powerful beastmen, by elves of various different varieties. A Lithanar's about there too. You'll also be kind of invaded by the dwarves quite early on. There's also now an ogre faction up there that beats you up a bit. You have to be pretty skilled, at least with diplomacy, or with Tomb Kings, or at defending, one of those three, to kind of manage as Khatep, especially on any difficulty above hard. This doesn't, however, mean it can't be fun. Now, his starting army used to be fantastic, and now it is not. He used to start with a tier 5 unit, a Hero Titan, a Spellcaster Giant unit. It was fantastic. They removed that along with their kind of purge of early game decent units, and they decided to replace it with Necropolis Knights, but we'll get to them in a moment. He starts with Nekahara Warriors. These are like a semi-better version of Skeleton Swordsmen. They're not awful, especially against weak kind of chaff. They will carve up a lot of kills. They amp the infantry. They've got decent leadership and armour and stuff. They will hold their own a bit, but they're not incredible, and they will crumble quite quickly against much more powerful armoured enemies, because they don't do armour-piercing damage. Then we have these Necropolis Knights. The Tomb King's cavalry is a bit of a weird one. They've got a lot of monstrous cavalry, this being part of it, and whilst they're pretty cool, they're not that good. These are poison attacks, which means that they slow the enemy, they degrade their armour, make it easier to kill them. That's pretty good. They are armour-piercing, armoured and shielded, so they're quite tanky as well. However, there's two major issues with this unit. Firstly, they have a anemic amount of unit count. 24 is nothing. Considering how big they are, 24 means that they will crumble and die really, really quickly. And my second and bigger issue with them is that they have 66 speed. Now 66 speed for any cavalry unit is awful, but for cavalry units this big that are going to take missile fire when anything comes near them, no. They are just far too slow. And I always find that they're quite good at going around the back and killing off slower units when fighting things like dwarves. The moment you fight things like elves, they will get destroyed unless you manage to hide them away, and at that point, what's the point of having them? I never go for this tree when playing the Tomb Kings as any faction. I don't really rate their monstrous cavalry units. The tier above this is slightly better, but this unit is it's not a patch on the Hero Titan, it's just crap. But not as crap as the next unit, the Nekahara Horsemen. These are, without a doubt, one of the worst cavalry units in the game. It says shielded and infantry. I'm not entirely sure where they plucked that from. Yes, they are shielded, they are holding shields. That doesn't stop them being incredibly squishy with a really anemic hit pool of under 7,000 hit points. 60 units, so not the biggest cavalry units in the game, realistically. Pretty good speed, but that's literally all they have, because they've got no attack, no defence really, crap charge bonus for a cavalry unit, they'll get stuck, missiles will shred them, they never do any damage, I just hate them. The Archer variant is marginally better, but still crap. This is a crap unit to start with. And finally, I was talking about these before. These are Skeleton Spearmen, the other meat shield unit, much better meat shield unit I should say, more hit points, more armour, more staying power. And of course they're anti-large, not that you'll be killing a lot of large stuff with them, but they can hold the line against cavalry and stuff a bit better than the Swordsman can. These are not really a starting unit, because obviously any Tomb King faction can recruit these from turn 1, but having an extra unit of them at the start of the game can't really hurt, and I value them more than the Nekahara Horsemen next to them. Faction-wise, Khatep has some interesting stuff. I don't think it's overly exciting, but it could be useful, I suppose. He starts off with plus 2 capacity for Lich Priests. Now, Lich Priests are obviously the caster hero for the Tomb Kings. They can be, as far as I recall, they can be Death, they can be Lore of Nekahara, they can be Lore of Shadow, they can be Lore of Light and Lore of Heavens. Out of those, most of them are pretty good Laws of Magic, bar Nekahara, which is very anemic, but we'll get onto that later. Having an extra 2, being able to put them in your armies, actually not bad. Quite a nice faction effect. It means that you can start building up high-level heroes much earlier on once you're able, obviously, to create them in the first place. You need the building, a tier 3 building, to be able to recruit them in the first place. But once you can recruit 3 of them rather than just 1. Next up, we have minus 25% right cost. Now, the Tomb Kings have some interesting rights. They have a couple of defensive ones, giving them extra spells, extra defences. They have some building ones, giving them cheaper buildings with less construction time. The thing for this, minus 25% cost, is their one that gives them a Casket of Souls. Now, Casket of Skulls is the Tomb King's artillery unit. Well, they have another one, Screaming Skull Catapult, but it's not nearly as good. Casket of Skulls is almost like a homing missile, pretty good reload, incredible range. They are one of the best units the Tomb Kings have, and I would rate them in the top 10 units in the game, to be honest. I think they're really, really good. Tomb Kings can recruit these as early on as whenever they get a full army, and it costs a very substantial amount of gold. It does change with each patch, but it's a substantial amount of gold, especially considering Tomb King's economy is pretty crap. Minus 25% cost is huge for getting these in, because the sooner you get one, the sooner the countdown will start for you to be able to get the next one. The other thing his faction gives is minus 25% crafting costs for the Mortuary Cult. Now, the Mortuary Cult, it's the other Tomb King faction mechanic that they have kind of throughout the game. which is the fact that they can create things. They can create extra army capacity. They can create items for almost every slot in the game. They can create regiments of renowned style units. All of these things cost canopic jars and gold, as well as some trade resources. All of these you'll pick up in the game. Minus 25% cost is actually quite a big buff, which means you can get these things up a lot faster. And whilst a lot of it is crap, there are some good items in there, there's a few good units, and the extra army is invaluable, because Tomb Kings have a cap on the amount of armies they can have, and to be able to get more, you have to use the research tree, which gets slower and slower and slower over time. His Lord effects, whilst there are not very many of them, I mean, they're not amazing, but what they are is good quality for him. His heroes, unfortunately not him, but his heroes get 25% experience. So this means your Lich Priest, this means your Tomb Princes, and this means your Necrotects. These are all actually good heroes. Unlike some other factions, I will recommend getting all three of them if you can when playing Tomb Kings. And they get experience 25% faster, they'll level up faster. So for Lich Priest, that means more spells, or the ability to cast them for less. For Tomb Princes, that means more mounts, that means the ability to do more damage in melee. And for Necrotects, it means the ability to buff constructs more, or to heal them. All of these pretty good. He also gets 10% campaign movement range. Pretty boring. Campaign movement range modifiers are always useful, even if it is a bit dull, because it means you're able to run away faster or catch up with someone, which, to be fair, with his start you will need. How does Khatep play as a lord? It's an interesting one. He is not one of the best lords in the game. I really like him, but that is just personal preference. He is a master of the lore of Nehekara. He has things like has Dijas Incarnation, he has Skullstorm, he has a couple of other decent spells. They're not as good as some other laws of magic, but he is good at casting them. He can cast them for very little winds of magic. But the reason I rate him as a legendary lord is because his kind of end tier mount, when he gets to I think rank 15, rather than like a dragon or a Necrosphinx or anything like that, he can ride a Casket of Souls. With him being a slow-moving spellcaster anyway, this actually pairs really well, and it means he can rack up a lot of kills with the Casket of Souls' excellent artillery style and his own spellcasting abilities. He has a few good bound spells as well. Crap in melee, really, really awful. I think he's probably one of the worst lords in the game in melee. If he gets stuck in melee before he has a mount, it's goodbye. But he can be quite fun, if a little bit challenging. Next up, we have High Queen Khalida of the Court of Libras, who, starting position, over here, as it always has been actually, near the Badlands and the desert units, but behind this mountain range, the one that contains Karak up here and things like that. Carrick 8 Peaks, etc. It is a pretty anemic start position. She starts near some orcs, she starts near some lizard men. It's like a shit version of Settra's start position, because you have a mountain range to cross to get to decent expansion, and you can only really go one of three ways. You have Skaven to deal with, which I find the Tomb Kings are not overly well matched against, and she has a really poor economic province to start in as well. Not that the Tomb Kings' economics are pretty good anyway. However, her starting army is probably the best of the Tomb Kings. Not that it's massively good, but it's certainly better than Khatep's and Settra's. So let's find out what it consists of. So, firstly, Skeleton Horse Archers. These are... It says Missile Cav. They are a Missile Cav. They are a Missile Cav with 15 missile strength. They are a Missile Cav with 60 units. They are a Tier 1 unit. They get absolutely fucked. They are weak. They are... I wouldn't call them very fast. They are fast, but they're no faster than any other decent cavalry unit. They're not like a decent Missile Cav that will outrun other cavalry units. And realistically, they're just a bit shit. They're certainly better than the melee variant, but I wouldn't have either in my army. Skeleton Spearmen, talked about them already. Decent unit. Decent early game chaff unit, but everybody can recruit them. Skeleton Archers, like with Settra, nice to start with them. Obviously there's a cap on them, but so. They're quite good as an early game unit. Here we get to more interesting ones. The Ushabti Greatbow, these are like a middling unit, the Ushabti, like a middling monstrous unit, and the Grey variant, they have decent, if a little bit boring, melee stats, but their real thing is that they have very, very good ranged attacks. There's 12 of them. They have very good range, they have a decent amount of ammo, decent missile strength, and they will pew the crap out of anything you're fighting that's got like blobs or big. They're armor piercing, both in melee and ranged. They have armor, they're quite tanky. Stick them in a back line. When they've run out of ammo, run them into the rest of your melee throng. They'll do very well for you, and they're a nice unit to start off with because it takes a few turns to unlock them. Same here. The kind of weaker artillery unit, but certainly not weak, the Screaming Skull catapults. These are interesting. They have magical damage, which means that they do a lot of damage against factions that are like physical resistant. Like they have incredible range of 380 and a really good demoralising missile strength, which kind of lowers the enemy's morale. If you can get them blobbed up, which as Tomb Kings isn't too hard if you kind of stack your spearmen properly, you can lay these in, and they're relatively accurate, with 4 of them firing each time and 22 ammunition. You know, that's 88 shots total on the enemy. You're going to hit some of them, and each hit will do decent amounts of damage. I've racked up hundreds of kills with these before, despite them being quite a low tier artillery unit. The faction effects are, they're actually quite good. Surprisingly, for Khalida, because she has +10 diplomatic relations with all factions. Now, this isn't really going to help you. There aren't a lot of factions here you're going to want to be diplomatic with, really, other than maybe making peace treaties. And because they can't confederate, it's not useful in that regard. It's good for alliances, I suppose, but with Tomb Kings I don't tend to go for a lot of alliances. They're quite a lone wolfy faction, and if they do make alliances, it's with other Tomb Kings that they don't need this buff for. But if you like to play more diplomatically, which I know a lot of people do, this is a nice little buff to have. It offsets other issues as well, like breaking treaties and trade issues and stuff. The other 3, though, are really good. 15% research rate is amazing for any faction. 15% faster research is absolutely fantastic. But the Tomb Kings have this thing where every time they research something, the rest of the research trees become slower to research. It's just a way they progress to stop them kind of unlocking all their armies really early on. 15% research rate doesn't offset this, but it certainly helps to kind of lower its impact, especially in the early game, which means you can get more armies up faster. It means you can get generals with decent stats up faster. It means you can get buffs to the units you like the most. These are excellent, and it's an excellent trait to have. +4 control in all provinces. I've never found Tomb Kings to have too many issues with public order. They have good amounts of public order buildings. They're quite good at kind of suppressing it. However, and their garrisons are not amazing, but they're semi-decent. However, if you play on hard difficulties, or you're of the more expansionist type where you like just running ahead into provinces you may not have corruption in yet, this will really help you. +4 control, especially on higher difficulties, will offset stuff. On lower difficulties, is a big buff. Will just help you kind of establish yourself, and it's nice to have. And finally, 20% ammunition for all armies. This is the best one, I think. Obviously, 20% ammunition for archers, especially when you're going to be using them a lot as your kind of damage dealers early in the game, is beautiful. But where it really comes into play is when looking at Screaming Skull catapults, when looking at Ushabti great bows, when looking at Casket of Salt, and when looking at Bone Giants, which are the tier 5, like artillery-style giant. They're a bit like Cygors in that style for the Tomb Kings. 20% ammunition is an amazing buff and will really help your army to pump out even more range damage. Her Lord effects are really boring, though. 50% reduction to casualty suffer from attrition in her own army. If this was a faction effect, I would love it. As an effect for her army, it's fine, but my god is it dull. Tomb Kings don't really care about attrition, because you just park up in a settlement when you're through the attrition, you merge all the units, like the spearmen that are taking casualties, and you just re-recruit them because you just can if you have a basic building there. But I suppose it slows it down. It's not awful, especially if you're going for some reason to try and cross the sea here. You'll encounter a decent amount of attrition, so I suppose it's nice in that regard. -3 corruption. I suppose this is good, especially over here for getting rid of the scathing corruption. But -3 is not a lot, although it does add up. Obviously, after 10 turns, that's -30, but that's 10 turns of sat in one province. So I don't know. It's not amazing. And poison attacks. Now, poison attacks are really good. I like poison attacks a lot. They reduce speed, they reduce armour, they make it easier to kill things and hit things. However, it is for her army alone. And this means that if you have ranged attacks like archers or you have cavalry, they will have it too. It doesn't mean her army is going to be particularly effective at kind of melting armoured factions and already quite slow factions. But because it's not faction-wide, her army is going to feel so much better than the rest of them that if you fight a battle with any other army, you're either going to get overconfident or you're just going to feel a bit disappointed, really. So I don't really rate it. But it is good for her army. She herself is a bit of a weird lord. You looking at her, you think she's a caster, but she's not, actually. She gets a mount. She gets one of these sepulchral stalkers to ride into battle. That's pretty cool. She is a kind of weird hybrid melee lord. She has a couple of explosion abilities in melee. With her snake staff, she kind of hits things out of the way. She does a decent amount of melee damage. Her tree is... It's very strange, actually. I don't really know what she's meant to be good at, and so I don't really rate her. I don't think she's ever been really rated as a legendary lord worth taking. It's one of the reasons why the Tomb King Federation thing isn't that much of a disappointment, because you wouldn't really want her anyway. Certainly I wouldn't, other than the fact that she looks really cool. And then finally, we have Nagash. No, it's Arkhan the Black, with the followers of Nagash. An interesting lord who starts over here in the desert of Arathay, near Raponce, near Volkmar, who starts over here, near Settra, actually, and the other factions that kind of mill around these Badlands areas. It is quite an easy start. Raponce is not a dangerous enemy. There's dwarves in here, and although they're a bit of a nightmare for Tomb Kings to deal with, you can just ignore them until you build up enough strength to just kind of blaze them down. But it's not the easiest start in the game, but I don't think it's that difficult, really. I've never struggled too much with it, but that might just be me. His starting army, well, his entire faction is a bit weird, because it kind of hybrids Tomb Kings and Vampire Counts, but not in a way that I would say is overly positive, but we'll get onto that. His starting army, whilst has a lot of units, none of them are very good. It's a bit of a shit starting army, really. Crypt Ghouls. Now, if you've played Vampire Counts, you know how many melee units they have. They have quite a few, and these are not some of the good ones. Bar the poison attacks, which are nice, and the fact they're quite fast, they're very weak. They've got next to no armour and lowish hit points. They are weak to armour, not just non-armour piercing, they're actually weak to it. And they're not that good, and on their own they get melted, and in a kind of blob of infantry, I don't find they pick up that many kills, but they're better than some other units. Skeleton Archers, as I've talked about with the other factions, very good, decent unit to start with for the early game. Skeleton Spearmen, same kind of deal. Obviously not overly exciting, but you can recruit them anywhere. Skeleton Warriors, these are shite, like Settra's, but at least he gets the Spearmen as well. But here we get to the interesting ones. So these are Hexwraiths. Hexwraiths are quite a cool unit. They're like an ethereal cav, so they have magical attacks, they're ethereal, they have the frost trait, which means that they slow the enemy as well. Being ethereal, they are very, 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 very good at fighting physical attacks. They have no armour, but that's because they just kind of dodge all of the melee attacks. Any magical damage will fuck them, and archers tend to do a bit to them too. But actually, they're not a bad cav unit. They're certainly better than any cav. I think they're better than any cav the Tomb Kings get. They're armour piercing, they are very, very fast. Despite not having the very fast tag, they are 20 faster than the Tomb King unit with a very fast tag, so take from that what you will. And they have Vanguard deployment as well, which is a really nice little bonus for cav units, I find, because it means you can go straight for the artillery or archers of the enemy. So this is definitely his best starting unit, and my favourite part of his faction is using this unit. And then Fellbats. What a waste of space these are. They are like Harpies, but worse. If that's possible. Bar being very fast, they are weak, they are squishy, there is not many of them, they do no damage, they swarm an artillery piece and then just die. They are so crap that I would actually disband them the moment you log in. I do not rate Fellbat in the slightest. I know some people do stack them, I know some people really like using them. I just can't understand it. I think they're really, really, really bad. His faction effects, whilst interesting, they're unique, I suppose. So the top one there enables recruitment of certain enhanced vampire count units. So the Tomb Kings obviously have this book system where they can collect books from around the map to give them buffs. He starts with the 9th book. The 9th book gives him this recruitment of vampire count units. Yeah, as far as I know, he can recruit Crypt Ghouls, mediocre but okay. Fellbats, shite. Direwolves, not as shite, but still pretty crap, especially in the later game, and Hexwraith, and that is it. So he does not get things like Varghulls, he doesn't get Vargheists, he doesn't get Terrorgeists, or Black Coaches, or anything interesting from the Vampire account. He just gets a few zombie units, and a cool cavalry unit. It's a little bit weird, and I would really like it if, when, and if he gets an update, they give him the ability to recruit or specialise more and kind of break away from the Tomb King monstrous units to make more of the vampire count ones, because at the moment he can only go up to tier 3 and then it kind of dies out, and in the late game, turn 80 onward, you're not going to be wanting to recruit Hexwraiths, and certainly none of the other ones, because you have things like Sepulchral Stalkers, you have Bone Giants, you have Hero Titans. Why the fuck would you want a tier 3 cav unit, He starts with +1 army capacity. This is the biggest reason to pick his faction at the start of the game. Army capacity for the Tomb Kings is a rarity. It usually takes about 10-12 turns to get your first set, and then every time it just gets slower and slower and slower. You can buy one of them through the Mortuary Cult. There's a book that gives you one as well, but there's not many ways to increase it. So he can start with 2 armies. Now bear in mind that the reason this exists, this cap on armies, is because Tomb Kings can spam recruit armies without any cost or upkeep, so they can just throw them. So he can get his army with this range of mediocre but existent units, a second army, which you can start levelling up obviously, but just fill it with spearmen and a few archer units. Now this army's not going to be amazing, but tag it onto his army, it gives him a huge numbers advantage that you can either use or benefit from, because auto-resolve really favours this. And it's a little bit cheesy, but you can use it to kind of win the majority of this kind of area he's in here, by just auto-resolving with these 2 armies you make. The Tomb Kings aren't meant to like him. Minus 50 diplomatic relations, you're not going to find it easy to make alliances with Settra or Khalida. You're never going to see Khatep in your life, because he normally dies, and if he doesn't, you're not going to see him anyway. But the other 2, you're not going to make deals with them, so I wouldn't play him if you want to kind of play like a Tomb King alliance-based campaign. But what he does have is plus 60 relations with the Vampire Coast and Vampire Counts. Now, they're not overly close to him. They are scattered up here. Obviously, the Vampire Counts, Vampire Coast here, down here. Closest is the Vampire Coast here with the Baroness Assault Spy, although she's shite and usually dies, so I don't know what you meant to get from her. But in the later game, you can kind of ally up, and plus 60 relations is huge for getting things like trade deals in place, which will earn you a fair bit more money. And obviously, these alliances with outposts, which means you can get better Vampire Count units, because you can build outposts in higher level Vampire Count settlements, and then spend your allegiance points on things like Varghulfs and Terrorgeists, which will be a lot more exciting than Cryptghoul and Direwolves. Lord-wise, interesting, but quite dull. And by quite, I mean very. Plus 10 Winds of Magic Power reserve capacity. Yeah, you can cast 1 more decent spell a battle for his army alone. That's all it does, more or less. But it's better than the next one. Plus 5 melee attack to his entire army. That's a plus 5% chance to hit for anything. Why? Why is it so low? Why can't they make it 10 or 15? I don't understand. Plus 5 isn't going to do anything. It never does anything. It's so little, actually, that I have never noticed the difference between playing his faction and any of the other Tomb Kings in melee. Because plus 5 is plus 5. It's not going to do a single thing. It might add to maybe 5 or 6 more kills across a battle. Maybe a few more, but certainly not enough to matter. He himself he's a better caster than Khatep is, purely because he gets the lore of vampires / lore of death. Depends what you spec into. So he gets decent things. He gets things like the Purple Sun and things like that. He can do quite a lot of damage. He is once again shite in melee though, and he doesn't get the Casket of Souls as a mount, so I don't know. Do what you like with him. I don't think he's overly exciting, but he can be quite an interesting lore-based lord, and using this plus 60 you can actually get some quite cool units. So now I shall rank them from kind of easiest to hardest, from easiest to hardest for new players and for returning players, for people who've not really played them before, just so they understand kind of what they should be going into and what for with the armies and locations and stuff. So I would recommend starting off to play Settra. He has probably the easiest starting position. Whilst his army is slightly crap, it's not atrocious, and the faction effects mean you can quickly build up a good army with decent replenishment, recruitment capacity, growth, and construction time reductions. He is pretty cool, and into the later game you can definitely get units up lots and lots faster with increasing capacity with these growth bonuses here. Next up, and this is only personal preference of mine, is Khatep. I actually think that he's probably a little bit harder than Khalida, and maybe Arkhan as well, but it's not just about difficulty, it is about fun, and I think he is more fun than those two. I think the Casket of Souls faction mechanic, the ability to get them faster, and the fact he can ride one is always cool. Lore of Nehekara, obviously exclusive to Tomb Kings. It may not be very good, but it certainly can be fun, playing as like a sand wizard. His position, whilst difficult, can be very rewarding if you manage to establish this province, because once the ogres get a bit fucked, you can kind of just pillage through the remains of Taurox's rampage. And of course his starting army is not amazing at all, but does leave him room to kind of expand outwards a bit, and he has great potential with the Lich Priests and getting up a lot of spellcasters, which I really find really fun. Then I'd recommend Arkhan. Slightly unique mechanic. Hex Wraiths to start are really cool. He has very shit Lord effects, but the faction effects allow for a really unique playstyle where you buddy up with the Vampire Council Coast and start using your allegiance points to kind of recruit up with this. I wouldn't have done this ranking in the second game, but because of allegiance points, I'm putting him higher than Khalida because you're actually able to get things like Vargulfs, despite what his faction book says, because you're able to buddy up with factions. And his start is not that hard, really. It's not amazing, but it's not that hard. And then Khalida, she is still fun, and her faction effects are really good, and her starting army is really good, but she's just really, really boring. Her start position is not that easy, but not that hard. It's very anemic. She is really, really bad in battle. She's just really boring. Once you get past the starting army hype, which is decent but not amazing, it kind of dies out. She's got really boring Lord effects. The faction effects, whilst good, are not as good as Settra. And I think whilst these two are harder, they are more fun. And I think rating fun above difficulty is important in these rankings, and so I'm going to place her last. If you want an easy Tomb King experience, play Settra and then play her and then one of these two. If you want fun, follow my ranking though, because I think that is the most fun you're going to have when playing Tomb Kings, and even new players are not going to notice a difficulty difference between her and Arkhan and Khatep. They all have pretty challenging starts with pretty mediocre starting armies. Thank you for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, at least to some extent. Please keep an eye out on the channel. I'll be releasing some videos about DLC and some Crusader Kings videos as well soon, so hopefully you'll watch them and enjoy them. Please leave a comment. I'll reply to any that are left. I love receiving them. And thank you very much to everyone who's already subscribed. Feel free to add your subscription to my numbers. It really, really means a lot to me. Give the video a like if you enjoyed it, and have a great day, folks.